Welcome to a new episode of PLO order videos. This time the topic is ground level explanation. I'm going to start PLO25 live session shortly, and idea is to go back to the very basics. Explain on ground level why we do something. Often in streams and videos we focus only on the more complicated parts and miss the things that are no-brainers for us. But now I'm going to do a video aimed for people who are transitioning from Hold'em to PLO, or just starting PLO, or struggling with basics. So let's get started. Let's see what we will have. And I thought for a while that should I have the HUD on the table or not. And I decided to keep it, and if we use it, I'm going to explain what's that and how. Mostly, probably just simple stats, but if there's something, then good thing to explain it. Time back is a bit short, so every time, if I fell short on time, I will open the hand on replayer and then we'll go through what was going on there. So let's get started. And it's a live session. I haven't handpicked any good spots or bad spots. We will get what we get. Big blind. This is actually interesting. Great to have it on the first hand. Before solvers, people playing like 80% on the big blind and they were happy. Then solvers came and now they're playing 40 to 50% and they're happy. And the win rates are quite the same. I would say that 50% is a good starting point, because same as in opening from the button or calling blind versus blind, the weaker the hand strength is, the more we need to be able to win pots without showdown. Like if we just cannot bluff ever, there's no point of playing crappy hands, because the value comes from the bluffs. So the more you know about the button, the more you think you can outplay the button, the more hands you can play. Now when we are on the button, or in any position, the biggest mistake people do is that they are cold calling too much. When someone opens, they call, they want to see the flops. And that's often a great way to lose money in PLO, when you call too much pre-flop. And if you have hands on your tracker, filter hands where you call pre-flop open and see how's your profit line, how's it doing. In general, our calling range pre-flop should be really tight. So if you have any doubts, should you call or not, then very often you just shouldn't. People don't realize how much they bleed money away on calling too much pre-flop. Because they are folding a lot of small pots and then they hit and they play one big pot. But waiting for that one big pot with crappy hand, you often have to fold 10 hands and you lose 35 big blinds while doing so. So don't call too much pre-flop. Only with really strong hand. Pocket ace is definitely open from any position, and the best thing that could happen is someone 3-betting us. That's what you want, because then you can 4-bet, and at that point the hand is pretty much over. And it's very easy to play mathematically profitable poker. Now we miss the flop. We have the 7 blocker and backdoor flush draw, and when opponent is marked green, it means that he's a bit call happy. Making loser call down, calling on the river with loser hand. So his calling range here is quite wide. Any pair with cut shot could have 2 pairs. But now comes the decision point, do we want to bet flop? And I like to bet instead of checking, because once we check, if he stabs the turn, we call, we get to the river with a lot harder situation than if we bet the flop. Like here, as we know his flop calling range is wide, because I have marked him green, then he has a lot of weak hands that then when we bet the turn, it puts him in a tough decision, and he folds, and we get him to fold decent amount of equity. Or if he calls with a pair and cut shot or pair and open-ender, we can value. About the color coding, you will see that some players have. There's a video about color coding and making notes and so on. So I definitely recommend to do that. You can pick up your own system in my system. It means that green is call happy. If the green is on high VPIP player, then he's just coin station. If the rec, someone whose preflop stats are quite solid, then if he has the green, it means that he likes to bluff catch, he likes to make call downs with pretty weak hands and so on. Limp pot, bottom 2 with cut shot versus short stack, but SPR is still at around 7. So checking flop, he checks behind. We should remove a lot of strong hands from his range, like sets and straights, when the pot is limped. So we can bet the turn for protection versus one pair, over pair, flush draws. But if he raises, then bottom 2 is no longer that strong, and we would definitely fold. So on the color coding, red means tight player, and then yellow is aggressive player. Then there's still this orange or brown that some might have, and that's good rec. Small blind versus big blind. In general, as a standard, we want to open 30%, and then we can go up or down based on what we know about the opponent. Like button, we want to open around 40%, but when we have info on opponent, we can go upper or downer. Once again, the same principle. The more we can win without showdown by bluffing, the more hands we can play. Because when the hand equity is low, we get more EV from being able to bluff. Opening ranges, I cannot use Solver, I cannot use Oracle at the moment to showcase if hands are in the opening range or not. With ace high, just betting half up, but he's going to fold a ton of hands, and once he folds the flop, we're quite happy about that. Well, we could check back, but then if he stabs the turn, it doesn't feel so great to call with just the weak ace. And once he calls the flop, it means he has something. The thing is, when we check the turn, we don't have the straight. So if I make 2 pairs on the river, I would call, but with weak ace, I'm going to fold. He will have a lot of... He might have the straight, he might have the set, ace, king, queen type of hands. Or bluffs. But the weak ace doesn't really work that well, and I don't think he has enough bluffs for us to make the hero call there. Queens and tens open, we can one caller, and board is ace 9, and now this is interesting flop, because if he doesn't have the ace, we have pretty much strong hand, so he's not folding anything better. But he is folding only 25% on the flop. So the thing is that I'm going to check back, because the only turn that I'm kind of scared is the king, if he has king high hand. But now when we check, he might stab the turn. He's kind of wrecked, so he might stab the turn. He doesn't bet the turn, so chance of him having ace goes down quite a lot. And then on the turn we have most likely the best hand, flush draw, so try to get value from flush draws, straight draws, jack X. No more reason to check back. But remember that anytime when you are in doubt pre-flop, should you call or fold, like here, should we call 50 cents into 160 pot? Should we call or should we not? If you are in doubt, always fold. Folding is EV0. So if you are not sure that doing something else is plus EV, then just take the fold. All right, now it looks good. We have pocket aces, and what you want is to get it all in pre-flop with aces. That way you know you don't go wrong. So definitely 3-bet. He's shorty. We can create low SPR. Even when he calls, now pot is 560 as 1230, so it's slightly over SPR2. So we're going to get it in on almost any flop. And he has 2 pairs with the open ender, so we are in a bad shape here. Very unlucky for us, but let's see if we can get board pair into the deuce or the 7. No. So queen 5 3 4. Not a great hand for him to open and call a 3-bet. And then he gets lucky on the flop. It happens. But even when the flop is that kind of, he will have, like, if he has pair and open ender, he's going to stack off. We'll have slightly over 50% equity. So SPR2 is kind of the threshold. And versus those acros, their pre-flop range has pocket pairs, has ace-high hands, so it means that on SPR, like 2.2, what was there, I would get it in on pretty much 100% of flops versus that player, and it's mathematically correct. Then it's just about variance, whether he hits the flop or not. This time he did, maybe next time he doesn't. But in the long run, he's not going to hit often enough. So even if I stack off on any flop, I will make money in the long run. Mean open from the bottom, and now the question is the hand worth 25 cents? And in heads-up pots, I think a lot of hands are. Because then the value of 7 high flush draw, the value of bottom 2 pairs, those go up in heads-up pots. And then he pots the flop, and we do have the cut shot to the jack. And we do have the flush draw, and he pots. The problem is that the flush draw is so often dominated, and we don't really have any other backdoors, so it's a close fold. If he had bet half a pot, it would be very easy call. And there's a huge difference playing versus full pot and half a pot. Because the equity we need and the imply notes we need are way different. Versus half a pot, we have equity to call without imply notes. Versus full pot, we need imply notes. And with 7 high flush and non-nut cut shot, it's hard to get those imply notes. I decided to 3-bet queens and 8s to isolate this. And we hit the top set, which is great. We have the 8 blockers, which is also great. And in 3-bet pot, we can just use bigger sizing, and he had auto fold. Could be worth notes. Yeah, if I would play here 25, I would make a note on him that he had clicked check fold. Because then you can actually, in 3-bet pots, use reasonable sizings. Even min bet if he's auto folding with pure air, and that gives you a great price for the bluffs. So don't ever use auto fold. We are not going to cold call 3-bets in general with any hand. There are exceptions, but in general, don't cold call 3-bets. It's not worth it. Especially with middle rundowns, middle in cards. Because the problem is then they are dominated way often than you dominate anyone. So if everyone has decent ranges, everyone is going to hit the flop around the same amount of times. So it becomes domination game. Queen 9-8, open kind of one call, top pair, backdoors. Versus aggressive player, good rec. These are the hands we can start to check back to have good hands in our check back range that can call turns. And now we have the cut shot, which adds up equity, and he makes a weird 3/4 donk on the turn. Calling the flop, donking the turn. So I'm going to call once. And now it just doesn't make sense what he's representing. On the turn, he's representing a straight, and now he's representing full house, so there's something fishy. He might have hand like 6, 6, 3, 4. And he had jack deuce, so he was bluffing the turn. And just unlucky for us that river paired. So that was a weird donk bet on the turn. He had the 8-4 blocker 4, but still versus his range we had decent equity, and then the river is just unlucky for us. But yeah. Let's wait for the next spot. Crappy, crappy, crappy. When you have good pre-flop ranges, it makes the post-flop a lot easier. And if you start to play with wide range of hands, like now this is more marginal, do we want to call? And now opponent is 21-10. And there's a lot of stats folds to see, but that he's sort of tight rec. So now the thing is that it's very closer to the call, because now I think there are certain boards where we can bluff him with high success rate. This is not one of them. Ace high board versus tight player opening. We don't make moves on this board, but on low boards, on paired boards, on monotone boards, we can make moves. I'm going to open because we have suited ace, but once they're open now, this becomes a fold. Same thing, if it's unopened, we open from the small blind, but there's an open, so we skip that. Now, rainbow ace, queen jack 9, quite close. From the cutoff I would open, and now cutoff is a tight player. Button seems to be tighter. So they're going to fold more than average players. So we can open from the middle position slightly more than normally we would. Now the question is, do we want to see bet or not? I'm going to mark this player as red. And as we don't have any backdoor flush draws or even the flush draw, I'm going to see bet. It makes my life easier. Then I can represent anything, like a spade comes, I can bluff. But once he calls the flop, he has something that connects with king jack 3 to spades. And 5 doesn't change the board, so whatever he had on the flop, he still has it on the turn. And now, does he have more king x hands than flushes? And as we're blocking straight draws, I actually think that he shouldn't have that hand in his range. What? And he didn't have the flush, so wasn't a believer. Let me open that on the replayer. But oh boy. He bet so small that we get a great price. If he folds here, like 40% of his hands, we make profits. But now the mean bet was with not flush or not flush blocker, and the bluff is one and done. Let me sit out, and I can take that previous hand. Let's see, that's just next hand. Yeah. He calls a flop c-bet with queen 4-5-6, which doesn't make any sense. So another third unlucky series of events, he makes a runner versus us. And then even calls the river with the straight. The reason, when I bet the flop, he has flush draw, king x, jack x. We are blocking that. We are blocking straight draws. He could have queen then, but his range is weighted, or should be weighted towards king x hands, or maybe queen then. So sort of hands or flush draws. And then on the river, the thing is, his king x beats us. So do we want to bluff or do we go to showdown? And it's quite close. I estimate that he should have more of king x hands or king 3 type of hands that should fold the river once we bet. Not sure if he does fold 2 pairs. Probably not, because he's not close with the straight. But if he has a king x, I assume he should fold. But now, when we see what he called the flop, it's not the person we are going to bluff, but it's a person we're going to value bet quite wide. As he's calling the flop on this board with nothing but runner straight to the 3. And the flop call is, it's horrible, but he got paid. And that's why he's going to do that in the future, because he just won almost $10. But unlucky. And it's not our lucky day. But it happens. And we're just folding those disconnected weak hands. Not open from under the gun. And let's see what happens. There's open, so we are not going to continue. Even if there's a lot of callers, this is not the multi-way pot hand. Often people make mistakes, like now probably there's going to be 1 or 2 callers. So they think, okay, 50 cents into a huge pot, why not see the flop? I might get lucky. Yeah, you might if the board is 5-5-8 or 8-8-8, straight flush, whatever. But the problem is when you don't hit super strong. In this hand, you will hit a lot of 8 high flush draws, 3 high flush draws with bottom pair, cut shot, open ender with weak flush draw. And then comes the domination problem. You hit something, and it's multi-way pot, and suddenly when pot starts to get bigger, you like your hand less and less. So in multi-way pots, we want to have strong hands that we can value bet, not potential. And those small double-suited rundowns don't have a lot of not potential, but they hit a lot of flops. So they are going to create way more problems than good situations. And the sad thing is that those bad situations overweight the good situations. So for every good situation, you want 3 bad situations. Free flop and flopping 9 high flush. Flopping flushes, especially 9 high, 10 high or lower, they are often best in bluff catching and getting 1 street of value. Now we even hit the set, and now if he bets, he's going to be pot committed. So now let's get it in and see if he has the flush or not. And wow, now it's our lucky day. We've got the higher flush. We've got the higher flush, and he has the 8 high flush. We had 9 high, so making the full house doesn't really change anything. But if we start to bet there on the flop, then do we barrel the turn? Because with small flushes, problem is that opponent's calling range has better flushes. So then suddenly the turn, we are not sure if we should bet the turn. And if we check the turn, opponent bets, we don't know if he's bluffing or not. We call, and then on the river, we are quite lost. So when we check the flop, check call. We keep the opponent range wider, which means that our small flush has more equity versus the opponent's range. And 9 high flush is not a big pot, and we don't want to play for stacks if we're 100 pips deep. Pocket kings and overpair, bottom pair, open ender versus call happy player. And now he's sort of reg, but slightly high VPIP, and green means that he's calling slightly too much. So his calling ranges are a bit too wide. And then what happens, we start to value bet a bit more. Or if we semi-bluff the flops, we're going to barrel turns more because his range is weaker than it should be. And just put pressure on that weak range with semi-bluffs. King Queen 6-5 is not playable. So we move on. A small rundown, top cap, might look nice, but the hand is actually quite weak. And if you're wondering why don't we have the hologram today, it's not broken, but I decided not to put it on because we have some of the hard stats, and so it doesn't distract with the table, so let's just keep it simple. There's one table, nothing more, nothing less. So we have the non-hollow stream, non-hollow video. Sorry. Let's see if we can pick up some few interesting spots before the video ends. Do we want to open or not? We have a tight player on the big blind, so often small blind should be folding quite a lot, and big blind should be calling quite a lot. And now, when we have the tight player on the big blind, we can open more because the combined fold equity is quite high. So very often we can even open any 4 cards when the big blind is a nit. Because then, even if small blind calls, it's often heads up pots, and we should be making money in heads up pot even without any kind of hand. King Jack and Rainbow, quite close. Should we call or not? I decided to call. If there was a suit, it would be very easy call. But Rainbow, a bit closer, and we flopped our pivot card, but he decides to bet. We don't call with backdoors. Backdoors are a nice addition to something, but we don't call with just the backdoors. One backdoor comes there by the river around 4 or 5% around. 3 to 5%, so I often use the average of 4. So if we have a backdoor straight draw, we were going to hit it 1 out of 27 times or so. Not quite. 1 out of 25. 22. I suck in math. Someone limps. Normally we don't limp behind. We either open or fold, but I think the exception is the small blind here, where we are out of position. So we don't want to isolate anyone out of position. So let's see the flop for half a BB. Too bad we don't hit it. And 3 ways, 1 call happy player. Not going to bluff here. It's good to remember that you don't have to try to win every pot. You have to try to win the pots that are yours to win. So don't try to win every pot in any means necessary, because then you start to overplay. Calling with pocket pairs, I think the hand needs to be more coordinated. 3 should connect with Queen Queen 9 some way. 8 or higher, or making it double suited. We try pocket pairs calling pre-flop. Often what happens if you don't hit the set, you need to fold the hand. So you end up folding 7 out of 8 times. And when you fold 7 times, then you're going to lose like 24 BBs. For example, 60 cents in the pot of 425. People think, okay, great odds. Problem is that the only component in the hand to hit the flop is pocket 4s, and we don't really wanna hit the bottom set in 5-way multi-way pot. So don't get yourself into those big multi-way pots with weak hands. Same situation, really tight player, and even small blind seems to be tight. We would open any 4 cards here versus these 2 people. This time it didn't work. They both call, which kind of sucks. Normally we would see bet ace high boards quite often. But now we have 2 tight players, so they have more ace high hands than on average. And we do have the flush draw, and 8 is pivot card to our rundown. So a lot of turns will give us additional equity. Like now, we have the flush draw and the cut shot. So the question is the flush draw alive? Is the cut shot alive? We don't know, but we have pretty good odds. 165 in the pot of 7. So by betting half a pot and him calling, we had such a great price that we can peel the river. And river is quite blank, and he decides to bet. We cannot bluff here, so we have to fold. But if we had equity on the turn, then in the long run, we're going to make money. Here's the acro player from earlier hands. And just folding these ones. Folding. 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 Nice run of bad starting hands. Sometimes you get that and you just end up folding, folding, folding. Now, this hand has way more potential than the previous hand. Because now we have a king high flush draw. And the hand is double suited, so now there's a lot of merit to call, even from under the gun. You see the flop, and we hit the trips, which is nice. And as a standard, I don't have a donkey range. I check my whole range in heads-up boards unless I have information on the opponent. Once he checks the flop, I would stab here with quite wide range. And I think he has pocket aces very often when he calls me on the turn. And if he has aces, he's never folding, so he might even raise for value. And I'm quite sure he has pocket aces when he didn't think longer. And yes, he had it. So it's actually a spot where a lot of people raise the river because they don't believe in quads, and if I don't have quads, they have the best hand. I don't think they should raise the river because there are a lot of hands. Like the only hand that would call them might be pocket queens, and there's 1 queen on the board, so he shouldn't raise aces. He has the second nuts and he shouldn't raise, but that's PLO. Pretty good example that sometimes pocket aces like there versus my range, he is ahead, but if he raises versus my calling range, he's pretty much always behind. So it's a situation where opponent has the second nuts, but he cannot value bet or value raise the river. Pocket kings. What does Bob do? 3-way pot, and we hit the flop. Top set on very dry board. And he decides to lead. And now the question is, what do we do? And there's a call. So should we call and hope for a blank turn? Or should we raise a little and hope someone overplays a top set? And I think it's better to raise, because then on a blank turn we can bet big and we don't have to pretty much touch the river that much, because we commit ourselves on the turn. If the board was something like King 9-5, then I would just call, because there aren't that many scary turns. But now anything between ace and 8, it's over half of the deck, completes a straight, and then we can value bet the turn. And that's a weird donk fold. And looks like both of them are folding. But we win a decent pot. It's better to win this pot than call, and then if the board doesn't pair, there's going to be straight on the river. And when he calls the flop, I mean, the only hand that makes sense is either some kind of made hand of 2 pairs, which is drawing almost dead, a smaller set, 1 outer, or he has the straight draw. So there's no point of betting the turn. We check and see if we get a pair in river, and then comes the ace. Which completes the other straight that didn't complete on turn, and he checks. I don't think we can value bet. He could have... I mean, he shouldn't check the straight to us, but you never know. And we cannot represent the straight. And he had a cut shot on the flop. So he had just an ace. He would not have called the river anyway. And that's a hand he shouldn't have. So I'm going to sit out and open that in replayer. When you see that he leads and he has a cut shot and backdoor flush draw, and he calls, it's not even the nut cut shot, and he calls the flop. If we think that should average player call here with the cut shot, the answer is no. And once we raise, should he call our raise with cut shot and backdoor flush draw? The answer is no. So he's calling wider than we estimate average people is doing. So he deviates from the standard player and our standard strategy, or deviates from average player. And our standard strategy, the way we play hands, is based on the average player. And now when he is not an average player, then that information means we should deviate from our standard line based on how he deviates from the average player we assume him to be. And I'm going to mark him as a green for that reason, because now I know that his calling ranges are wider than normally, and I can instantly adjust. I don't need HUD. I don't need to make a note out of the hand. With the green, I instantly know to adjust my strategy a little. Slightly less bluffs, at least 1 bet bluffs. If we want to bluff, then they are barrels. But we definitely value bet more and understand that when he calls, we define his range accordingly. But that's the second time opponent does pretty loose calls on the flop. So if you're wondering, can I beat PLO25 Zoom? I think we have an answer. Now we have a tougher spot. Opener is super wide, so he can have a lot of hands. And then we get a call from really tight player. And I'm going to call because we have potential to make a straight. Queen high flush should be decent. And I kind of hope this guy folds. He calls, which is a problematic for us. Now it's kind of stuff. We have the backdoor flush and we have the cut shot. If he had folded, it would be easy to call versus his range, but once he calls, he has ton of ace X. But would he raise? I'm going to see the turn. Because if he has ace-king type of hand, then we're drawing pretty thin. But when he doesn't, he might have ace-queen, ace-jack, and now he was barreling and now he raises. Okay, so this guy probably has ace-king or both kings. And now we can get away from the hand. And he doesn't stack off, so he was bluffing. So it shows that the estimation was quite accurate, that this I win 75 call on the flop was a bit problematic for me. Versus the aggressive player, the hand strength is quite good and I like it. And without him, I would have check call on the flop, check call on the turn, and probably check call any river. But the tight players calling the flop was a bit problematic. Because versus his calling range, our hand is not that great, and that was shown there on the turn when he raised. Then 9-8-7, let's call. We flopped the nuts, so how do we want to play the nuts here? We do have the top two pairs, so all we have to do is dodge the diamond. And as I said, I don't have a lead in range. And he checks the flop, so that's weird because he seems to be pretty active. Now we need to protect the hand. Don't give free cards. Don't check twice. Strong hands there. As then you just give in 2 free cards. Flop is okay, but then if you check the flop, you give a free shot to make his flush. So don't do it. Protect your hands instead of giving free cards. When you have fun, time goes pretty fast. And my plan was to make around half an hour video. And I just checked that we've been running for over 40 minutes. And I was thinking that we are not even at half an hour mark. But it has been such a fun. It has been such a fun session, fun to play, and fun to play one table where you can really explain and focus on stuff. Didn't feel like 40 minutes. Felt like 15 minutes or 10 minutes. So I'm not going to make the video too long, but if you enjoyed the concept where we only play one table and focus on the decisions, and I try to open my decision making as good as I can instead of just playing the hands out, then give feedback. Put a reply there on the video or reply on the Discord. And if you like the concept, then definitely going to do more. Could do even live streaming with one table, videos, whatever. But only if people have the need or appreciate it, because then if no one enjoys these kind of videos, then there's no point of doing them. But if people do enjoy, then I'm definitely going to do them. Here, opponent, we can see that out of 12 hands, he has played 6. So he's probably not super tight player. And our hand is crappy. It's not open from small blind. So the only reason why we would open that hand from the small blind is if opponent folds a lot of big blinds. If he folds enough, we can open any hand. This is definitely an open. And we kind of missed the flop. We have the jacks, so there's a merit to check back. But I like to bet this board. On average, people fold 40 to 45%. So betting half a pot is profitable in the long run. So I know that betting half a pot there is profitable, period. And when he checks the turn, we can check back, and very often river we go to showdown. And our pocket jacks, even 9 of them, we have high equity versus his range. But most of his range on the flop are straight draws, flush draws. Maybe kings, we are blocking queens. And on the river, he needs, so flush gets there, straight gets there. If this would be let's say the 10 of diamonds, and he needs, I would call, because then he has a lot of missed flush draws, missed straight draws, but now everything gets there. We see that he's aggressive, but in order to call here, we need to be able to answer what hands are he bluffing, what is he bluffing range. So what are the hands that call the flop but would need the turn that we beat? And to be honest, 4-5 is the only one, and that's pretty rare. And he has a lot of hands that would value bet the river. So don't just think that, okay, opponent is aggressive, I have over, I need to call. Think about his range on the flop. It's wide, but it's possible to define it. It's definable, if that is a word. And then on the river, what part of that range he could bluff you with. And then we come out with the conclusion that there aren't many hands. So his river range is, he could bluff the river, but his range is super value heavy. So the question is, would he be bluffing often enough? We play 3-bet in position. We're going to call. It's kind of a nice hand because when the flop comes, we know what we have. And then we have a bit problematic. Because versus try aces, we have 40%. So we could stack off. We have a backdoor flush draw, and we have a 2 backdoor straight draws. So I'm going to call, because now if the turn is a king, we can fold. If turn is an ace, we can fold. Turn is a 10, we can happily call. And then we resume. Not using cash out here on PLO25 now, and he had a king, jack, queen, queen. Flopping top pair and open ender. So versus that hand, we didn't have too much equity, but we got lucky. But I would say that if you assume opponent has aces there, you are not going horribly wrong, because every time when your hand has equity versus aces, you often have equity versus the opponent's real range or hand. But instead of shoving the flop when we know we are behind, the question is that once he pots the flop, he's not folding any turns. So if there's even one turn card that we can fold, then the EV of a call is better. Now, tight player makes a first 3-bet in 112 hands. Ace King 9-7 looks nice, but versus pocket ace is horrible out of position. 200 pips deep. That's quite easy fold. In position, debatable. Out of position, easy fold. One of those hands that, if you're optimistic, you start to see potential versus open. Okay, we get 10-cent discount, 65 in the probably pot of $3. Good price, but everything this hand often flops is problematic in multi-way pots. So don't put yourself in a situation where there's way more bad outcomes than good ones. We want to be in the situations where we have a lot of good outcomes. And that starts with correct pre-flop range, where we are the ones who dominate. We are the ones who can value bet. Like same concept of what kind of hands we should have in 3-bet range. We want to be in 3-bet pots, we want to be the one who dominates opponent more often than they dominate us. And in multi-way situations, the domination is one of the biggest things you should consider. Not potential is more important than board coverage or how often we hit the flops and so on. Alright, now it's almost 50 minutes. So I think it's time to sit down. And I would love a feedback. Haven't done these kind of one table explanation videos, so if you watch the video, please give me some kind of feedback. Even I don't care is a feedback. Small blind should be tight range. From the big blind would be easy call. Small blind, don't. That's kind of hand that will put you in a lot of problems 200 pp's deep, out of position, so. It's easier to fold the marginal spots pre-flop. And now PokerStars doesn't want us to leave. And there's the limper. We're going to isolate him. Normally we would isolate here pretty much our cutoff range. So is this hand open from the cutoff? It's close there, but versus the limper, definitely openable. And this is a spot where I'm going to bet fold. We have top pair open ender. So versus his calling range, there's a lot of turns we can just value bet. But once he calls the flop, we have the 8, we have the jack. Flush draws are quite high in his range. Queen jack, queen tens, king queen tens. And we don't improve, and now he's checking or betting, but I think he's going to win this spot almost always. If we think what hands do we beat, there aren't many. And there it is. He was calling the flop with pair and cut shot. Pair and cut shot and cut there. So we can actually, we didn't have a green. Oh, we had green color on him, did we? Yes. Good. Just making sure we got him labeled. Alright, that's the video. Hope you enjoyed. And I will see you on the next video on PLO order. Stay safe in the galaxy.